you're a high-performing professional and lately you've noticed that working harder is producing diminishing returns, this is worth your attention. You're not less capable. We know that. You're not losing your edge. We know that. But you may be experiencing something very, very specific. You prepare more, yet you may be preparing more, and yet you feel less decisive. You may stay later, you may work longer hours, but yet you feel less clear. You're not even more productive. You push harder, yet your cognitive sharpness doesn't respond the way it used to. Does that feel or sound familiar? And the most unsettling part is this. You used to handle this level of pressure with ease, almost with anticipation. You enjoyed that level of stress. But now it's different. This is not a mindset flaw, and it's not simply exhaustion or fatigue. It's what happens when chronic workplace stress keeps the nervous system in a sustained state of activation. In this episode, we'll break down the neurobiology of high performance under prolonged pressure, how the stress response affects executive function, decision making, and identity stability. I talk about identity shifts a lot in my videos, and what recalibration actually looks like. And if this resonates with you so far, there's a free nervous system SOS guide linked below. It's a short, practical resource designed to help you pause, ground yourself, and reduce escalation when things feel too much. And it outlines the first stabilization steps for professionals operating under chronic stress. But first, let's look at why intensity stops being effective. Hey there, lovely people. Thanks for watching from wherever you are today. Quick favor before we get going, tap that like button, say hi in the comments, and of course, subscribe with the little bell so you don't miss anything. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, hit auto download so every new episode finds its way to you straight away. Let's dive in. There comes a point for many driven professionals where you work longer hours, but output drops. You prepare more, but you feel less confident. You push harder, but you feel strangely flat. You react faster, but you think less clearly. And because you're used to high capacity, your instinct is to double down. More caffeine, more planning, more control, more talking to people, more looking like you're busy, more mental pressure. But something feels off. You're irritable, your sleep is fragmented, you begin to replay conversations, your mind is looping, you dread meetings you used to dominate, you used to love those meetings. And this is not a mindset problem. It is a nervous system saturation problem. And it's important to get the distinction. So let me describe someone that I sometimes work with. So let's just say that they're a senior consultant, top performer, highly respected, used to driving under pressure. Over 18 months, let's look at that span. So over 18 months. So this is what's happened. Increased responsibility, political tension, subtle undermining, high visibility, outwardly successful, internally, though, hyper alert, short-tempered at home, overthinking small feedback, struggling to switch off. Their solution was to work harder, be sharper, control more variables. But here's the issue. When your nervous system is overloaded, pushing harder increases threat perception. And this reduces executive capacity. So the very strategy that built your career begins to dismantle it. Let me show you this visually. So I'm going to show you this as a high performance stress curve. And this is part one of my awareness. I'm going to call this awareness. Right. So let's make this. This is your baseline. Let's make this your baseline. And let's say you are experiencing some tension. Let's say you've got continuous pressure. And let's say you're now hypervigilant. Okay. So this is how it would look. At your baseline, you would start to, I'm going to have to use the red for this. It would start to rise. Your stress would start to rise. Yeah. And then with the continuous pressure, it would continue to rise. Okay. Consistency. And then with hypervigilance, it continues to rise. And so effectively, there is no full recovery. In other words, you never come back to baseline. You never come back to baseline. You never ever come back to baseline. So what you want to do is always try and come back to baseline, how you normally are. This is your baseline. This is where you want to come back to. Now, so let's look at a collapsed curve, okay? So let's see. So, all right, let's go back to baseline. Let's go back to baseline here. Okay, that's your baseline. Now, let's say you are experiencing some stress, and therefore you start to feel from baseline, you start to get brain fog, not frog, but brain fog, because that's what you would get. So it keeps rising. Let's say with the brain fog, you're now irritable because that's normal. That will happen. You'll become irritable. And now it's going up and up. And let's say because you're so used to the irritability now, you're there. You're still there. It's still happening. And now you're experiencing reduced executive function, which means your decision making is going, your sleep, your ability to think clearly, to make rational decisions, to weigh things up, executive function, to see things a particular way, to balance things out, that will now be collapsed. So, in other words, I'm going to draw the curve. The curve would be going up, but then it would collapse at some point. And eventually, you may return to baseline, but you may not. This is baseline, but you may not return to baseline. You may get just close to it, but then go up again. So again, no full recovery. Now, this is where professionals, just here, this is where professionals normally sit, just here, where they're just about functioning and they think they're functioning. They think they're performing well, but as you can see, they're not at baseline. In fact, they could just be, perhaps they didn't even get that far up. They could just be here. And this is really where professionals sit. This makes it very, very difficult to stay in any kind of real, let's say, continued success or continued productivity. And because you've not got to baseline, because you haven't got to baseline, it's now rising. It's getting worse and worse. And eventually, baseline can become, eventually, if you're not careful, baseline can dip. You really want to get back to baseline, but it can dip. And if your baseline dips and if it becomes normal to you that this is now your baseline, this is your baseline now. It's dipped, very different from before, very different from this baseline. Now your baseline has dipped. This can start to feel like the norm. And so you start to feel as though stress is normal. You start to feel as though brain fog is normal. And then you start to feel as though lack of tolerance is normal. And none of it is. And that's what you want to avoid. You really want to avoid all of that because it's not necessarily, you really want to avoid that because as you can see, this is affecting your general well-being, how you become, how you are, and how you're becoming as a person. We're always continuing to grow. And if stress becomes a normal part of you, that can be difficult. So normally, stress should spike and fall, as I showed you in the diagram, and you respond to a deadline, cortisol rises. You perform, cortisol drops. That's adaptive. That's just being adaptive. That's our normal response. But chronic workplace stress looks like the spike that I showed. Instead of a spike and recovery, you see sustained elevation at a spike, as I showed in the diagram. No full return to baseline, as I explained. So when this becomes your normal operating state, your prefrontal cortex cannot function optimally. You'll be at a deficit. You'll be working at a deficit. When the system finally cannot sustain that plateau, it crashes. High performers often mistake this plateau as productivity, as I explained in the diagram. But, biologically, it's survival. You're just surviving. So it's not going to be helpful to continue at that level because it's not an optimal level. You think you're performing well, but actually you're not. And all the professionals I've worked with around this issue have always shown that they know they're not being optimal in their response. Now, let's bring this back to your day-to-day life. Let's talk neurobiology. Your nervous system has two primary gears in this context, in this particular context, and that is the sympathetic activation and the parasympathetic recovery. So high achievers are often, I want to say, extremely comfortable in sympathetic activation. Deadlines, they actually thrive under pressure. They appreciate competition, visibility. That's exciting for them, enjoyable. Short term, this sharpens focus. It makes you feel productive. It builds confidence. Cortisol rises, adrenaline increases, reaction speed improves. But chronically, the amygdala becomes hypervigilant. So the prefrontal cortex loses efficiency. Decision making narrows, risk tolerance shifts, creativity drops. You begin operating from protection instead of expansion. The HPA axis does not differentiate between a genuine threat and a prolonged political tension at work. So it simply stays on rather than off. Now, here's the trap. This is very important. High performers interpret the early signs of nervous system overload as I need to try harder, which increases activation further. And at a certain point, your system cannot compensate. You feel flat, foggy, irritable. Irritability is a huge, big signal. You feel detached. And this is not weakness as such. It's biological overflow. You really do need to take heed. I want to pause for a moment and bring this together. If you are a high achiever, noticing that hard work is no longer delivering the same results, it really comes down to this. your nervous system has shifted from performance mode into protection mode. Chronic workplace stress has kept your stress response activated. That reduces executive function, as I explained before, narrows decision making, alters how you show up and when you show up. And this is not a mindset flaw. It isn't. It's nervous system overload. It will be so helpful if you could see the distinction. And the goal of this video is to show you that recovery begins by stabilizing the system. That's why I go on and on about it. It's not really about increasing the pressure or your workload. Let's look at what you can start doing differently, because that's the important thing. That will do three things. It will reassure you about how to go about it, and it will reinforce your ability to feel better about yourself and not to take it as a natural flaw. And identity is huge in this. So this is where it becomes dangerous. This is where you really need to take heed, because high achievers build identity around capability, how capable they are. When capacity drops, identity feels threatened. So you compensate, you micromanage, you over prepare, you tighten, and ironically, this reduces influence because you're actually showing people that you're not very capable. You start to feel unlike yourself as well. And this is not a personality change as such. It's sustained nervous system defense, because that's what your nervous system has learned to do. Now, I'm not going to give you hustle advice, and I'm not going to tell you to quit your job. The first intervention is this: stop increasing output. Start increasing recovery. Not passive recovery, active nervous system regulation. 3 immediate recalibrations. 1, reduce cognitive load after 7 p.m. So no strategic thinking. 2, insert a 90-second physiological sigh breathing between meetings. So just let it out. And 3, separate threat from workload. So is this dangerous or just demanding? The moment you shift from pressure to regulation, executive function begins returning. And performance does not increase by force. That's why all this pushing doesn't help. It increases by capacity. One thing that can help just to get you started is my free nervous system SOS sheet. It's a quick checklist. It really can help you to pinpoint where your nervous system has become unregulated and the things that you can do straight away, right now, once you download it, to help. So the link will be in the description. There's no doubt that when your nervous system is regulated, decision-making sharpens. It gets clearer and better and quicker. Influence improves. Confidence stabilizes. Energy becomes sustainable. High performance is not about intensity, going harder, going more. It's about internal bandwidth. Do you have the bandwidth? And if you're overloaded, you won't. You won't have the bandwidth. And what's worse is that you'll be blaming yourself. If you are responsible for high stakes decisions, lately you've noticed your clarity narrowing rather than expanding under pressure, this may not be about resilience, being resilient. It could be more about your nervous system capacity. So I encourage you to download that free guide to check. Now, as this is the first episode in a 5-part series on high performance nervous system recovery, next we're looking at what I call neural optimization and why regulation increases ROI, return on your investment. If this resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and check out the pinned comment for that 5-minute SOS, nervous system SOS guide for high achievers. because before you optimize performance, you need to stabilize your nervous system. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Don't forget to download the Nervous System SOS Kit. And if you want to know more, check out the next video on screen, and I'll see you there. If you're ready for exclusive soul-nourishing content that you won't find anywhere else, become a subscriber on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to access ad-free episodes with special guided meditations and visualizations for calm and clarity, and bonus episodes on spiritual growth, personal growth, energy healing, and spiritual awakening. Join the inner circle and experience deeper self-discovery today.